Hello and welcome back to another episode of VFX with Natron. So today we have a different kind of episode. But first I wish to talk about what's been going on. You might have noticed that today we started a wee bit later than I normally do. I'm usually spot on at 4 p.m. Unfortunately, I've been juggling trying to make or move these videos over to YouTube, so for a more organized system for people to track down these videos, because there's a lot of them at this point. Anyhow, I just want to let you guys know, you say, hey, wait a minute, YouTube, it's on YouTube, how do I find out about YouTube, just in case you've been oblivious to, you know, the whole situation. So I thought I would first start off with showing the YouTube site, the new YouTube site where this is all going to be found. And mind you, the Facebook live streams, which this is one of, is always going to be first. And eventually it's going to take several weeks before all the videos get up to YouTube. But anyway, let's take a look first at the website. So here we go. This is what our website is called, and it's Peanut Butter and Natron. And why is it called Peanut Butter and Natron? Well, because Natron's a wee bit sweet and it's a wee bit salty, and everybody knows I'm a wee bit nutty. So that's the reason for it. And so today, that's really not today's goal, but that's why we are where we are. So let's switch over to Natron, and because today's topic is, of course, the difference between SE, excuse me, not SE, excuse me, is between iDistort and STM, or STMaps. I always call it STM because it's three capitals in a row. It's like I want that M to be part of the whole thing, but it's not. It's actually just STMaps, or map. Anyway, so here in Natron, what we have, I have a preset thing, and we've used these over the past few weeks, talking about various types of distort and so forth. But there's a clear difference. One of the things, first things first, we all know. Let's talk about what we already know, and that's part of the reason I have this set up. And I have some of this already set up I have this set up in a logical fashion, because there's things I want to demonstrate, and this is going to be a shorter episode because I want to get back to getting all the YouTube-y stuff up. And if you're from YouTube and watching this, hi, this is when it happened. Anyway, back to this. So we've talked about it. We've talked about the fact that iDistort starts off. It's UV source, and both of these use UV sources, but there's a difference between the two. If we look at STM, we can see, alright, first of all, this is our sources over here. This is a little folder I've made, or little, not folder, but background. I've put a few types of UV, or things that we might use as image sources for what we're going to be exploring today. And you can see we have our checkerboard, and we have a color bar, and we might chuck other things in later. It all depends. I don't know whether we really need to, but I was originally thinking to maybe chuck it in an image map. But there is one other thing we're going to be chucking in there later. But the thing is that when we look at these, we're starting off with the checkerboard. Now, both the iDistort and the STM map work off of taking in having both the source, and they require UVs. But the way they work with UVs is very, very different, and it's crucial to understand what that difference is. And I'm actually going to clarify what that difference is in this beginning here, so that we can understand. So if we have the proper type of map, what we're going to see when we look at the outputs of both of these, without any distortion information on them, we can see that we wind up with exactly what our source is as an input. So we are looking, if we look at our checkerboard's just plain checkerboard, nothing's been changed. The STM, if we click on it, nothing's been changed on the STM map. This is its default. However, with the iDistort, because I feel like iDistort needs to be set up properly, in my opinion, the proper place for iDistort, or for, excuse me, yeah, for iDistort UV maps to start. We want to have them by default. We should always, as a baseline, set them so that their offset is set to 0.5, 0.5, and a UV scale of 100, because we can always, that is basically maximum UV scale. Now, the UV scale is how much it's distorting it from, and that will make sense when we go into it in a bit. But you'll notice that I have also two different sources, or UV sources. On the case of the iDistort, I have a solid setup to 50% gray. All right, and I've gone over this a half a dozen times at this point. The reason I use a 50% gray is because iDistort works off of the concept of we're going to call it, or we're going to identify it today as what it actually is. iDistort works off of relative distortion, okay? And for relative distortion means that we have to pick a point, a value that it distorts from. And the distortion point that we've, by default, when you start it, it defaults to 0. The problem with 0 is that it's very difficult to see things that work in a negative direction, a negative distortion direction from 0 point, because 0 is black. So by setting it to 0.5, we basically have moved it up, and it gives us a visual representation whenever we look at the maps and so forth from it. And this is actually going to make more sense, I think, when we actually see a map type that also uses this. There is another type of thing that works off of relative distortion, or relative from 0.5. All right, so this is basically a 50%. This is gray, neutral gray. All right, and when we look at it in the iDistort at 50% gray, when the iDistort is set to 50% and 100, we wind up with seeing exactly what our source is. Nothing's distorted. If we change the input source up and down a little bit, let's go over this, go back. If we push it up and down, we can see that it pushes it side to side in a diagonal, based off of distortion values, and we'll reset it to 0.5. All right. When we go to the STMap and we look at it, the STMap does not work off of relative distortion. It works off of absolute distortion. And by absolute, I'll mean that we have to literally, it doesn't distort by a value. It distorts off of physical pixels. We are actually telling it where to grab this source from based off of a map of those pixel points, okay? Or it's an X map, or a U map, and a V map. And that's exactly what we have here. This is our map. It has X, which is our X, or U, in this case, is our R, which is this. And it works from the left-hand side of the screen all the way to the right-hand side of the screen, okay, from 0 to 1. And our V, which is green, or Y, is works from 0 all the way up to 1, okay? And when they're combined, we see them as a color-coded map of values between 0 and 1. And this is an absolute map. Absolute. What this map tells us, and it's very important that people understand this, is that this map tells us exactly, if we were to take the yellow from up here and put that yellow down here, what it would do is grab, if we actually, let's just say, instead of grabbing, the yellow, if we were to grab a chunk of this map from up in this upper right hand corner, it would literally, and we pushed it somewhere around that, it would literally grab this entire corner of this image map and move it somewhere around our image. So we could literally take bits and pieces of this entire image, and based off of how we move these bits of this STMap around. We could, you know, cut pieces out with, you know, various shapes and whatnot, and we can move it. And that's really, that opens up all this possibility, because it means that in a lot of ways, you know, it may not sound very interesting at first, but basically if we were to take an image plane and map this around, and then we took our 3D, actually, let's do that. That's actually a really interesting point. Now we're going to break some things here, but if we took this map and we put a 3D card on here, or card 3D technically. So we'll type in card, and we get our card 3D. All right, and we take our UV map here and we put it in here, and let's pretend that that's our source. So here we have our card 3D, which is a source. All right. And now I'm just going to, for the sake of this situation, actually we want it over here because we're using this as a UV source, not a thing. What we're going to do here is I want to take this. How shall I do this? All right, let's just, for the time being, let's just take our UV map. Now I'm going to tell you it's probably going to, by default grab a bottom left, because we're going to leave the outside of it black, which actually may not, because it may also get alpha, but we'll see. So let's take our UV or our card 3D here, and let's scale it down to half a time. In fact, actually, let's change it so that it's no. We'll set it to 3. We'll bring it down to half size. All right, like this. All right, and then we're going to change it so that we're looking at it. We're not going to worry about the Z. The Z is probably going to, I don't know if Z is actually going to do anything. No, Z doesn't do anything in this case. It's completely ignorable. But the reason I wanted to do this is because we can also, we can stretch this and shrink this, this is going to remind us of something else. So we'll take this, and we're going to put this into the STMap as our background, all right? And when we go to our STMap and look at it, now we can see that the entire image has been scaled down based off of our card 3D, all right? So this also means that if we rotate our card 3D, watch what else happens. Let's rotate this actually a larger amount. Let's rotate this fairly large amount, and notice our entire image is rotating with our STMap is rotating with the card 3D. This is very important because what this is, there's a lot of implications that are going on here. This means that the STMap can be 3D. I talked about this before, or I mentioned this. This means right now we're not really doing anything that we haven't been able to do in Natron in the past. But that's because we're using a tool that already exists in Natron. All right, we're using card 3D like card 3D. But what it's doing is it's manipulating it. It's not actually manipulating our checkerboard pattern. What it's doing is it's manipulating our UV map, and then that UV map is driving this STMap. All right, and that has a lot of implications because, well, this is 3D. You know, it's some form of 3D manipulator. What's to say we're restricted to using this? We're using just a card 3D. We could put some shape that represents 3D. Use that as our the basis for our 3D distortions or our absolute STM wrapping of this map. We can use it to define it. So if we, for example, could take our UV map and wrap it around a sphere, we could, in theory, map this checkerboard in a spherical form. All right, so you can start seeing, I'm hoping I'm causing some of these little light bulbs to start popping on. And this is very important to understand because this is very different if we were to take our and by the way, I'm winging this episode a lot more than I have in past episodes. I want to go over and let's look at what happens if we take that exact same thing and put it in the iDistort. When we go into the iDistort, it's not doing anything. It's not actually moving it. Why? Because all it's doing is it's saying, well, this is relative to where it was. It's not, watch what happens as we rotate this. It's just going to look like a little window, so to speak. It is distorting it a wee bit. And it's doing some interesting stuff. But the iDistort, when it's working with this UV map, isn't really doing anything interesting. All right. So that's our first thing. That's our first interesting thing about that. All right. We aren't going to push the concept of taking STMaps to do real 3D stuff yet, or any further than this today, because it's beyond the scope of today's thing. But by just keep that in the back of your mind. All right. So let's go back. When we go back here and we look at our two maps connected to their original thing, the gray, obviously the iDistort works off of the gray. STM is an absolute map that works off of UVs. And so we saw our first example of what that means. And, actually, you know what? Let's take, what happens if we take our solid and put it into that card 3D? That's actually something we didn't do, because it's really not going to change things. Watch this. We take a card 3D, we put it over here, we go down to our iDistort, and it didn't do diddly to it. Okay, yeah, we got something going on here. It's a little bit, we're rotating it. Actually, let's put it back up to 10, and we'll rotate it a lot. And we can see it's updating, and we're getting a wee bit of a square, and it's a little bit distorted. Okay, that's not all that interesting. What about if we instead of using, going through from the iDistort, if we put it on the STM map, what happens there? Well, all it's doing, again, here, all we've got is a gray blob here, because this gray, this 50% gray is just telling it, okay, we want to grab the 50% gray mark, or 50% mark, or map. Let's see, what is it doing? All right, it's got our UVs. It took our UVs from there. Oh, wait a minute, I did the wrong thing. We want to do that, which is, we want this to be our UV map, not our source. And is that right? Did I do everything right? I want to make sure. All right. So there we go. That's more. I was thinking, that should have been yellow. And it is yellow. And the reason it's yellow is we ran into this problem before. This card 3D is entirely 50% gray. Well, 50% gray in the standpoint of STM is setting it to the halfway point across our UV map, which would be halfway across. And what is the 50% mark? Well, the 50% mark happens to be, on this particular map, happens to be right smack dead center of this, which happens to be a yellow pixel. So this is saying this entire thing is a yellow, is basically the 50% mark from this map, from our source map, which is yellow. So all we've done is we've recolored it based off of this, and it's not going to do anything interesting because there's not more to it. If we put a gradient in there, we could maybe do something more with it. We could get like a diagonal from it. Anyway, enough of that. We're drifting into areas of boringness. So we're going back here. All right. So we'll disconnect our card 3D. We've used that as our UV source. What if we do something else with this? And all right, and we could also just to point out, if we take the we could use the color bars as a source here, and all right, we want to connect our source. Let's connect our sources up like that, so that we're both looking at it from the same thing, and then take our UV maps and let's take our UV map back here to that card 3D. For a second, go back here. You can see when we did the same thing to the color bars using the card 3D, we were able to basically do this, and it works just like a card. If the card 3D had that image on there, except for it's not actually. It's almost like it's kind of like blue screening in a sense. We're putting something that doesn't actually exist onto this virtual plane that's defined completely by this UV. What's on this map here? Whatever's feeding this is actually getting distorted on our map. All right. So this is an absolute positional information, and it's mapping it based off of what's feeding it. So this opens up a whole lot of interesting things that we haven't looked at before. Now let's pop back. All right, let's go over to our checkerboard again for our source, go back to our iDistort and do something we've done sort of before, which is all right, let's look at our what we're going to be using here as I've taken this solid here. It's a black solid, and then I ran it into an SE noise, excuse me, and I animated this SE noise. All right, so let's look at what this SE noise looks like. All right, it's just simply this pattern here going up and down. All right, not very interesting, or is it? What does this mean? What is this going to do with these two different maps as a UV source? Well, if we take it and we run it directly in as our UV source for our iDistort, we start getting this, something we've sort of seen before, which is this sort of diagonal pulsing going on over here. And we see it, and we use this, we've done this a few times, we use this for making particles waver and so forth. Well, all right. What happens if we disconnect that and go back here to our STM and take it and use that as the source over here? Wow, we've got this psychedelic, random, like rainbowy, or circular target things. This is really weird and not what that's different. It's interesting. What it's doing is it's diagonal. This is basically this value. It's going, as these change, these values are basically looking at the position on this map. It's basically going diagonally across this from one corner to the other because it's getting an equal amount of X or U and an equal amount of V information. So we're traversing diagonally across this, and as it does, it creates rings based off of the values as it goes from the dark areas out to the white, which is why we're getting these perfect circles going around as we look at this. And so we can see this, the yellow is the 50% gray, but each one of these circles is basically the blacks and or each one of those checker patterns as it diagonally goes across that. All right. Whereas if we change our source to the color bars, we start getting this really interesting, funky, pulsing circles, almost like targets for bows and arrows and whatnot, which is really interesting. And this could be useful. There's a lot of things we could do with this. We could use this for creating, of all things, if anybody knows what a false color, when you're doing exposure compensation for or exposure information with camera data. A lot of times people, videographers or cinematographers, will set their monitors to do false colors. And you could use basically a gradient that went across in one direction with intervals of some colors set to whatever your map happens to be, your IRE values. And you could set it across there. And if you put it across and then you ran it through STM, you could literally get a gradient to map to based off of grayscale information, which opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. This makes you could make you could take your stenciled or blurred drawings and make them colored. And that's actually one of the areas that I hadn't really thought about this, but there was a Natron user, and I'm blanking on his name, and I'll try to get it and I'll mention it in future. But he actually was one of the people who who got me thinking about this, and I was like, hey, I'd never thought about using an STMap that way, and all. It started making me go, ooh, all the possibilities. Anyway, but this isn't actually what we're going to do something even a step further than this, all right? We're going to take this map one more time. And last week, I had shown using image-based distortion where I had used this properties of these blur nodes. And on those blur nodes, you'll notice that we have these X derivatives. But last week, we had actually blurred the edge of our checkerboard mask because we had basically a hard edge. And hard edges weren't interesting for it. But what I didn't tell you guys is you don't actually have to put blur into this to take advantage of this derivation. I don't even know how. Derivation order. All right. For the X and Y derivation orders. All right. Watch what happens if we take this and connect this up to our SE noise here. When I connect it, I don't know if it's actually, what is that not showing? We should have this. Huh. All right, let me look at that. Let me look here. It's possible. It's very possible. Oh, man. No. All right, there it is. Aha. It was just very dark. All right. So it's because it's not a very intense map. It's not creating very strong values here. But I combined them the same way, and then I multiplied it here by a very large amount, 100. And lo and behold, we can take our SE map, of this map, and we can create basically a UV map or UV image-based map. In fact, this is exactly sort of how UV maps are created. We can use this to actually create distortions and or maps. We can take images and pull them in and turn them from two-dimensional bump maps into UV maps by running them through this little node configuration right here. And the multiplier node here is our intensity of how much we want that UV map to influence it. Now I'm going to take this UV map and I'm going to take it down, and I'm going to actually apply a 50% gray so that it can work with our iDistort. And this is actually looks far more like what people are used to with UV maps. And right, anyway, we're going to just leave it like this because I like it at the 50% mark. We're just going to play with it here because we're going to have fun. This is about having fun. All right, let's before we move forward, let's reconnect our source or our image source back to our checkerboard. Let's go over to our iDistort first. Let's take a look at what our iDistort does when we connect it up to that UV map. And let's start playing it. Let's back it up and play it and start looking. And we start getting some really interesting stuff happening here. I don't know if it's super apparent, but we've created this pulsing sort of image in and out of our UV maps around it. You can see it's distorting in and out and so forth. And it's questionable whether that's really all that much different. Let's see if that's any different than if we connected it. Well, that's definitely different. We're definitely getting a different thing. What this is doing is very similar to what we were doing before last week, or in previous weeks with our data, our image-based data, where we're distorting it based off of what we've animated. We've created an animated version of our image-based distortion, so we can create animated sort of UV maps using our SE noise. That, you know, this amount isn't the most distortion, but we can see that we can make it so that it distorts in and it's pinching and it's pushing it based off of that. So we can create these pulsing pinch push things, which could be very, very interesting if, say, we did use something that could maybe benefit from it. Like, hey, what happens if we actually were to take and connect, you know, well, actually, before we go looking at that, let's look at it on the color bars. The color bars aren't as interesting because there's not as much information for it to push and pinch here. But we'll look at those in a bit. I don't want to move too far forward. All right, we've looked at what this is doing as a UV map through the iDistort, what does it do if we for the STM? Let's take the STM, connect it up to that as our output, and then connect it up here. Holy smokes, we're winding up with a lot more interesting, sort of very weird. We're getting this really interesting pulsing checkerboard patterns that are going in and out from that point because they're getting mapped. It's all getting mapped to the UV values around that. It's just kind of creepy weird in its own sort of way. It's really cool. What about if we take it and connect it up to our color, to our color bars? All right, now we're getting this really interesting sort of almost lens-like distortion. Wait a minute, lens distortion. Lens distortion. Remember that lens distortion, because that is actually one of the things that STM maps are known for, is lens distortions. When most programs, almost all programs, have some form of STM map in it, and they use it. Nuke has it. Blender actually has the ability to use STM maps for lens distortion as well. One of the things that's nice about STM maps is because they are a uniformed UV-based distortion, we can apply it consistently from one application to another application to a degree. We know how the UV works. So if we create a lens distortion, and we'll actually get into this, I'm actually going to do an episode where I demonstrate this happening, but we're creating, you can basically use an STM map to define counter distortions for for a distorted lens, like if you had something that was a fisheye. What we're doing here is we're basically sort of creating this pulsing, interesting thing using it that's working sort of like micro fisheyes. It's pulling it. It's actually pushing it in and pulling it out. So anyway, so this is interesting. This is really interesting. We've created this very interesting celluloid pattern. Here's something I wanted to talk about, which was, all right, these are static images. These are both static images. What if we take these, if we take the results of this, and instead of, I've gone back to our iDistort first because that's what we started with. What if we apply it to the actual iDistort as the source? Or, you know what, we could even, what happens if we did it to the actual UV map? Now we've created a distort of the distort. We're creating this is like multi-level of distortion here, you know. We could feed distortions through themselves to distort the distort or the UV map. You know what I mean? It's just, that's weird. We could take this, and honestly, I think this is actually what I'm looking at here is probably going to wind up with something very similar to what the iDistort would have. Actually, we're looking at the iDistort. What am I thinking? All right, let's look at the STM. Oh, there we go. That's a lot more interesting. Oh yeah, we could put that through and do some interesting things. I don't know what the result is. I don't want to go into that because we're running a little long right now, and I know I'll get carried away. All right. What I really wanted to focus on was not looking at that, but I want you guys to think about this. All right. Let's see what happens if we apply. Oh, wait. I don't want to be on the STM. I want to be on the iDistort. I'm going to grab the input and I'm going to connect it to that SE noise. All right. Well, that's interesting. That's not what I was expecting. All right. So this is our ST noise by default. And this is what it is distorting based off of this UV map on the iDistort. It's kind of doing this like double-lined, double-edged pinch distortion, which is really kind of cool, but not that interesting. What about the STM map? Let's take a look at that. Whoa, that's way more interesting. That's really getting into crazy, creepy weirdness. Wow, we could just watch this. Hey, I've got an idea. Wait a minute. What if we take our iDistort put our iDistort source back to that UV map. Take the UV map, pipe it into our STMap. Hold on, I'm just trying to think about this. Put our STM maps source over to the SE noise. All right, this may be. Nope, we're winding up. I was hoping that we was going to wind up with something more interesting. Maybe I was going about this wrong. Maybe what I want to do is instead of well, let's see. We want this to be. Let's take that as our source. Then we want to. Well, you're using. Let me think about this. We want to. All right. We want our UVs to be that. Right. We want this to be there. All right, which is going there. That's good. All right. So we're going to use this. Then we're going to take that, put that into the iDistort. All right, so this is going to be our iDistort map. Is that the UV? No, I'm sorry, that's not the source. We want that to be the UV for the iDistort. Then we want to take the iDistort and try to use it as the UV. Boy, this is trippy weirdness. Nope, not doing anything overly interesting there. I was just thinking it might be interesting. Might be. Don't know. You know what? We might even try just, what if we take this back there? Whoa, that does some interesting stuff. Whoa, we got that really weird. Alright, this is the UV here. We want to take the source from, let's take the source from, hold on. I just need to basically, alright, that's not, I want to just try one more thing. Let's take our STMap and apply it to that. Nope, not doing anything really uniquely interesting. I had done something earlier that looked a lot more interesting in my opinion, but oh well. I think we've explored this. The whole point was to show them and how. I'll let you guys in on a secret. Honestly, a lot of times if you pipe the STM map, the iDistort into the STM map, basically distorting UVs to it. It's not as interesting as taking the STM map and distorting it and putting it into the iDistort a lot of times. We can get a lot more interesting results using it. But I feel like let's try something here. What happens if we take that and put that over there? Interesting. Well, you know, I'm just experimenting here. Wait a minute, wait. What on the world? What if we take this and plug it down there? I don't know. I'm just playing with things, experimenting. Anyway, we've run almost. Whoa, that's getting really weird and really wow, funky weird. All right. Anyway, I'm sure that a lot of you are looking at this going, "Oh, brain." I know, but the whole point is that we want people. I want people thinking about this because this whole concept of using these things is going to be very important for types of things. And by the way, just so people are aware, if there is something you don't think, if you see something in another program that you don't think Natron can do, there's a high probability you can do it in Natron with what we already have for tools, I believe. I think there's enough tools in Natron that we can do things. And I'm going to get into doing some more stuff that might play off of this idea in the not so distant future. Anyway, yeah, I'm beating the bush. All right. So right. Let's go back here. All right. Well, I just want to say thanks for watching and keep on Natroning.